The year is 2011, and reigning champions Audi have entered their brand new R18s at Le Mans. This year the regulations have changed quite dramatically. We've got smaller engine sizes, smaller fuel capacities, all in the name of slowing the cars down. And Audi have put a roof in their car for the first time since 1999. Another radical new design for another new set of regulations. And Audi are essentially playing Peugeot at their own game. And yet still, somehow, it's Audi that win once again. There are so many parallels you can draw with the decade earlier. We have a brand new, unproven Audi, completely different to its predecessor, and yet still completely bulletproof, very fast, and demoralising the entire competition. The question remained, as always, when was someone seriously going to do something about it? We wind the clocks back to 2009, a breakthrough year for Peugeot, finally winning back the 24-hour of Le Mans trophy on their third attempt with the 908s. Audi had brought a new car that year, the R15, and although it was quick out of the box, everything was a bit underprepared in relative terms. Peugeot did an Audi, great speed, consistency and reliability. Audi, on the other hand, experienced what it was like to be everybody else. Outright speed wasn't an issue, but the team struggled to nail down a good setup. The car was tricky to drive, suffered from bad tyre wear, and even a few mechanical issues along the way. This was only the second time in a decade that they'd failed to win. A year on, with a prepared Yost squad, Audi were Audi again. Sure, they still couldn't quite match the Peugeots on outright pace, but the French cars broke down one by one, and the reliability and consistency from Audi resulted in the R15 of Bernard, Dumas and Rockenfeller breaking the outright distance record en route to victory. And that brings us neatly back up to 2011. The new speed-based regulation changes, and of course, this brand new Audi R18. Another diesel engine and another incredible slice of Audi engineering supremacy. Now, despite two of the cars suffering dramatic and early exits in the race, something I'll come on to a bit later on in the video, the third car, despite a number of minor setbacks throughout the race, did manage to hang on and did manage to win the race ahead of 4 consecutive Peugeot 908s. And that would mean Audi had won their 10th race at Sarthe, 10th Le Mans 24-hour. Absolutely incredible. And it would also prove to be the final outing for the Peugeot 908, which would be canned at the start of 2012, Peugeot pulling the plug on the programme, and that would be it. The cars would be no more. Ultimately, the 908 was a successful and quick and exciting Le Mans car, but now its history had passed. It was time to be consigned to the history books. Not to worry though, because Audi were not going to be left alone at the front. A year later, and one of Japan's biggest manufacturers was back to try again. After coming so close to overall victory in both the early and late 1990s, Toyota returned with very clear goals in mind. The ACO and the FIA also had clear goals in mind, with the introduction of a brand new series that year, known as the World Endurance Championship. Innovative technology was another key component in 2012, with Audi's R18 e-tron Quattro being a four-wheel drive diesel hybrid machine, and Toyota's challenger, the TS030, a rear-wheel drive petrol hybrid. And these weren't the only unique vehicles, as the organisers introduced another new concept known as Garage 56. This was an entry reserved for a team that built a car showcasing environmental vision and ingenuity, and would become a yearly feature. The first ever Garage 56 entry was the ridiculous looking Delta Wing. Ridiculous can be taken in a positive or negative context on this one. I'll leave it up to you to decide. You can drive it on Gran Turismo 6, by the way, if your PS3 still works. Before we go any further, I want to check in with the situation in the GT classes. After the epic battle between Corvette and Aston Martin running from 2005 all the way through to 2008, the GT1 class as a whole entered a transitional period. Aston Martin shifted their focus to their LMP1 efforts, which sadly never really took off. It never got close to Peugeot or Audi for that matter. Corvette Racing were left with no real stiff competition. I mean, the privately entered Lambos, Astons and even the other C6s just didn't have the resource to fight with the American giants. The following year, the ACO decided to do something about it, opening up the entries to competitors of the FIA GT1 World Championship. Now this did result in some really interesting entries, stuff like the Ford GT, not exactly the one I'm driving today, but a GT1 Ford GT that looked like this one. 3 of them entered, 5.3 litre V8 engines, absolutely epic, but even with this, it wasn't enough to save GT1 as a class. The thing is, GT1 cars were just too expensive to develop, too expensive to run, and GT1 at Le Mans was dying. 2010, would be the last year where GT1 cars would compete. And it's a real shame because the class itself had won the hearts of fans all over the world for decades. It was an amazing class, but things had to change. It was a Saleen that took the final victory in the GT1 class, and it actually finished behind the winning GT2 car, which tells you just how bad things had gotten by this stage.
Fear not, however, as the ACO had a plan. GT2 was in far better shape as a class, with huge entries from several of the biggest names in motorsport, from Ferrari, Porsche, Aston Martin, Corvette and BMW, to Jaguar and Spyker. So instead of getting hung up on the loss of GT1, why don't we rebrand things in a way that elevates GT2 and transforms it into the premium GT category? And thus, GTE was born. These regulations stabilised GT racing at Le Mans, allowing it the space to prosper. Instead of having two separate classes with different technical regulations, you instead had two separate classes, GTE Pro and GTE Am, for differing experience levels.
Now all of this worked brilliantly. So brilliantly in fact, that GTE as a class at Le Mans ran continuously with no issues from 2011 right up until 2022. However, this year's Centenary, the 100th anniversary, will be the last year we see GTE cars at Le Mans. They're basically being replaced by GT3s. There's a lot more of them, more different manufacturers are going to come in, cheaper to run, cheaper to develop, yada yada. It's difficult to define what's been so special about GTE. Maybe it's the plethora of motorsport giants fighting out every year, maybe it's the uncertainty of who's going to win each time. I love the raw, guttural driving experience of hounding around one of these 911 RSR GTEs. I love the story behind Ford's return to victory in 2016. I love the fact that Corvette, Aston Martin and Ferrari were all fighting it out for wins like back in the GT1 days. I think they shared 7 GTE victories between them so far. To be honest, I think it's a combination of all of these things. Everyone has a favourite car, whether it's the M8 for its ridiculous size, or whether it's this new Corvette C8R for its sleekness and un-Corvettiness, or maybe it's this Porsche 911, which is my own favourite, just because of how epic a driving experience it is, how raw an experience it is, as I said before. It doesn't matter really, but at the end of the day, GTE racing always produced close motorsport, close battling, and the teams pushed each other on every year, so it was always really, really close. And over the years it's just got more and more and more competitive, and that's what it's all about, isn't it? Epic cars, great racing with fantastic drivers, and close competition. This is just pure, noisy, premium motorsport at its very best. I could chat about GTE all day, but we don't have time, so we're going to move on. Unfortunately, there is one sad chapter in the GTE story, and to tell you about that, we're going to head back to 2011, which is the year where GTE was first introduced.
The crazy cornering speeds reached by the LMP1 Peugeots and Audis were drawing comparisons to Group C, epic, but dangerous. Despite the aforementioned regulation changes slowing them down, there were 2 massive accidents, both involving contact between Audi R18s and GTE Ferraris. Firstly, Alan McNish's car somersaulting through the air, landing within the confines of the circuit against all of the odds. How nobody was injured is beyond belief. Hours later, the second Audi R18 of Mike Rockenfeller had similar contact with another GTE Ferrari, sending him head-on into the Armco barrier at over 180 miles per hour. Again, it's miraculous that nobody was hurt. So 2012, and with all of the innovative new designs, the return of Toyota and the Garage 56 debut, eyes were firmly on the sport. Audi would win again ahead of the chasing HPDs, Oricas and Lolas, and Toyota would be the ones to suffer a horrendous accident. This one was nearly identical in nature to that of Rockenfeller's a year earlier. Anthony Davidson clipped another GTE Ferrari, only this time air got under the car, sending him flying through the sky before slamming back onto the ground and straight into the barrier, the Ferrari ending up on its roof for good measure. Davidson would break 2 vertebrae and be out of the hot seat for 7 months. Sure, this streak of massive crashes was a cause for concern, but seemed to be caused by LMPs lapping GTEs, rather than anything else. And considering the size of the incidents, the cars held up remarkably well. A few lucky escapes, but all in all, you'd be forgiven for feeling pretty confident about safety. There hadn't been a fatality at Le Mans since Sebastian and Enjolras in 1997, and the last driver to lose their life during the race itself was Joe Gartner back in 1986. When 2013's edition rolled around, there were to be no dramatic incidents with lap traffic, no somersaulting prototypes, just one relatively innocuous crash in the opening stages that would end in tragedy. Dane Alan Simonson, having claimed GTE pole in his Aston Martin Vantage, lost control exiting Tertre Rouge on lap 3, sending his car into the barrier on the left-hand side before bouncing back into the middle of the road. Despite the best efforts from the marshals and medical personnel, the 34-year-old succumbed to his injuries shortly afterwards. The situation shocked the world of motorsport and was an unwelcome reminder that even after all of these years and all of the improvements to safety, racing was still dangerous. Changes were made all around the venue, including the section where the accident took place, moving the Armco barriers and improving the protection lining the trees. Despite plenty of dramatic incidents, there haven't been any fatalities at the circuit since. After the slew of serious accidents and the tragic events of 2013, the race needed a pick-me-up, and in 2014, that's exactly what it got. LMP1 was being fought out mainly between Toyota and Audi, but another contender was about to join the battle. The one manufacturer history showed us was capable of taking the fight to Audi, and that of course was Porsche. We'd seen so many two-way battles since the turn of the century. Now we had the current king, the determined challenger, and the returning legend. This was certain to be another golden era of sports car racing.
We'll start then with Audi, who just won 3 consecutive races with their R18. Tom Christiansen had won his 9th Le Mans 24-hour as well, which is an all-time record, and it would be his final victory on a personal level, one which he would dedicate, of course, to his compatriot, Alan Simonsen. 2014 would mark the start of the 3-way scrap between Porsche, Toyota and Audi, and let's just say that each of the 3 teams had their moment. Pole sitters Toyota led the majority of the opening 12 hours, but mechanical issues for their cars through the night ended their race early. Porsche also came very, very close on their return to taking victory. They led late on in the race as well, but again, mechanical issues, and they fell short. And who does that leave? Audi hadn't had the perfect race themselves, they'd had their own issues, but thanks to their bulletproof reliability and their relentless nature, they were able to win yet again. And that would mark their 13th victory in 16 consecutive Le Mans starts. Absolutely phenomenal. I'm getting sick of talking about Audi victories. This will, however, be the final time I talk about an Audi victory, because it would prove to be their last. The car I'm driving right now is the 2016 version of the Audi R18, so they did compete again in 2015 and 16. And that would be the end. They would bow out. And that means a total of 13 victories in 18 starts for Audi at Le Mans. I mean, even in the 5 races that Audi didn't win, they always had a car on the podium, every single time. The stats speak for themselves. I would say Audi have their own book on the history of Le Mans, let alone just a chapter.
In 2015, it was Porsche who returned to the top step, Toyota still desperately craving a victory of their own. Many remember this race because of current F1 driver Nico Hülkenberg winning on debut. I remember it because of Nissan's gorgeous but ultimately disastrous attempt at joining the fight in their front-wheel drive GTR LM Nismo. I can't help but love this car, although sadly we never saw it again. 2016 was supposed to be remembered as Audi's last dance, but it wasn't. In fact, it felt as though they snuck out the back door without telling anyone, whilst Porsche and Toyota stole the headlines in what would arguably be the most memorable moment in Le Mans history. After hours of intense battling between both Toyotas and the number 2 Porsche, things appeared to be settling down for the race's conclusion. One Toyota had fallen back with damage repairs, but the number 5 car had opened up a 1-minute lead ahead of the Porsche. After years of falling painfully short, it was finally going to be their moment in the spotlight. Then, with 23 hours and 57 minutes on the clock, as Nakajima crossed the line to start his final lap, the car ground to a halt by the pit wall. Cue scenes of shock, horror and jubilation, images that would become iconic in an instant. The immeasurable contrast between the screams and tears of joy in the Porsche garage, and the pained faces etched with disbelief at Toyota. The raw emotions couldn't be further apart, but the extremity of these on both sides of the wall showed everyone exactly what winning Le Mans meant.
It was impossible not to feel sorry for the Japanese outfit. I mean, to leave Le Mans once again empty-handed after coming so close was heartbreaking. But you can't blame Porsche for that, and they did a phenomenal job regardless. They were thoroughly deserving of their second victory with this 919 that I'm driving right now. They actually became the first team other than Audi to win 2 consecutive Le Mans 24-hour races since, well, Porsche. Now, winning Le Mans a couple of times was not the only thing this car was famous for. It also spawned the 919 Evo, which is a ridiculous machine. Basically, it's this car, but without any restrictions associated with circuit racing, with the LMP1 regulations. So it was more powerful, lots more aero, less weight, and that thing was absolutely insane. Once you let this car's hair down, it can achieve phenomenal things. I mean, around Spa in 2018, with Neil Yanni behind the wheel, even during a demonstration run, this car lapped quicker than the 2018 Formula 1 pole lap, which was a record at the time as well. That's how quick this thing can be. It shows you just how much downforce these cars could produce without the shackles on. I was actually racing at Spa during the weekend when it did one of its demonstration runs, and watching it through Radeon and Eau Rouge, I mean, I will never forget it. It didn't look real. Hypersonic. Even before the Evo version came along though, the LMP1 cars of this period were producing lap times around Sarthe that nobody had ever seen before.
Kobayashi's pole lap for Toyota in 2017 was a 3-minute 14.791, a lap record which still stands, and is likely to do so for years to come. Their speed wouldn't matter in the end, however, as all three cars suffered major mechanical issues. With Audi out of the picture, and the only other LMP1 entry from Baikolles crashing out early on, this left Porsche, who surely had it all wrapped up once again. Well, an hour-long pit stop for the number 2 car took them out of the picture early on too. All of this meant that with 5 hours to go, the number 1 Porsche had a 13-lap lead over the LMP2 leader, the Jota-run Jackie Chan DC Racing outfit, who were now second overall. You can imagine the pandemonium then, when the leading Porsche pulled over with engine failure. Suddenly, you had 4 LMP2 cars leading the field with only 2 LMP1 cars still circulating. This was in stark contrast to years gone by, when LMP2 cars were breaking down left, right and centre, showing just how far the quality and reliability of the entries had come in that class. They had struck a golden formula with the world's top privateer teams running customer Oricas, Ligiers and Delaras to name a few, and for years, competition was as fierce in LMP2 as any other class, even the mighty GTEs. A fairy tale ending was in sight, but so was the recovering number 2 Porsche, in the mirror. With just over an hour to go, they took the lead, and would hold on for Porsche's 3rd consecutive win. This was a comeback showing exactly why you should never give up at Le Mans. There was another memorable finale as well, as in GTE, Aston Martin overtook Corvette for the win on the pit straight with 1 lap to go, just like Porsche had done to Toyota the year before. A popular win for the British outfit, 9 years after their last. Since that tragic moment back in 2013, Sarthe had provided drama you wouldn't dare script, year after year, a golden era of competitive endurance racing at speeds never previously witnessed. It was exactly what was needed. But, as with any golden era in motorsport, it wouldn't last forever. There was still one last box needing ticked though.
Toyota still hadn't won a race. Still. At the end of 2017, Porsche followed in Audi's footsteps and withdrew from the World Endurance Championship, which meant for 2018, Toyota really didn't have much competition. Sure, that's taken nothing away from the smaller teams like Baikolles, Dragon Speed, Rebellion, who were in LMP1, but let's be honest, they just didn't have the resources to fight with the big guys. The epic 3-team battle at the top was finally over, but what it did mean was that in 2018, Toyota finally broke the curse. They won the 24 Hour of Le Mans on their 20th attempt. Nakajima and Buemi led the team. Those were 2 drivers that suffered heartbreak at the end of the 2016 race, so they got their redemption. And the 3rd driver in the car was none other than Fernando Alonso, who was making his Le Mans debut. I mean, not a bad start, but it's Fernando Alonso, I guess. Anyway, the point is, hard work pays off. Well done, Toyota.
So, after clinching victory, would they bow out, content with achieving what they'd always wanted? Of course not, and it was win number 2 in 2019, with a new race lap record to boot thanks to Mike Conway, and in 2020, it would be win number 3. This one was mainly remembered for taking place with no crowd, and in September rather than June, thanks to the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic. Something positive would come out of this terrible period, however, as on the June weekend when the main race should have taken place, the first ever official 24 Hours of Le Mans Virtual took centre stage. This event was a great distraction for motorsport fans who hadn't really seen any action for months, with many of the top real-world drivers, both past and present, taking to the grid on rFactor 2. You had multiple Formula 1 world champions, Le Mans and Indy 500 winners, teaming up with the best sim racers on the planet, watched by millions across the world. This was a major step in the history of Le Mans for racing game fans, who now had a path to compete in an official 24-hour of Le Mans race against their heroes, without needing to be a professional racing driver, or a multimillionaire. 2021 rolled around, and normality at Sarthe was, well, still a pipe dream. The main race would take place in August this time, and although spectators were able to return, restrictions were paramount and capacity significantly reduced. This was a real shame, as many fans missed out on witnessing firsthand a new dawn for sports car racing.
Hypercar had arrived. Well, in a literal sense. Toyota and Glickenhaus brought bespoke new hypercar designs, specifically for the new regulations. Alpine also showed up, with what was essentially an LMP1 car with some glasses and a fake mustache, and some heavy restrictions. What I'm trying to say is, yes, hypercar had literally arrived, but its best years were still ahead of it, are still ahead of it. So what were these new regulations all about? Why were they brought in? Essentially, a number of reasons. Firstly, they wanted to slow the cars down. They wanted to cut the development costs to encourage more manufacturers in. And they also wanted a level playing field. They wanted good balance of performance, and they wanted a chance for manufacturers to build bespoke, unique designs that could also compete on a level playing field with the top tier of endurance racing in the States, the LMDH class. Now, the idea of balancing these two regulation sets were so that hypercars and LMDHs could race on a level playing field in the World Endurance Championship, bundled together in the hypercar class.
Ultimately, all of these things would combine to bring in more manufacturers who could compete at the highest level without needing to blow astronomical sums of money on development. It also meant that variety would return to Sarthe. Yes, you could build a more standardised LMDH car and still be competitive in the class, but you could also build an extravagant and unique hypercar which demonstrated what your manufacturer was all about. Maybe a certain visual characteristic, maybe a certain type of technology. You could be bold and different from the rest, or you could save money and make racing feasible, yet still, no matter which way you go about it, have a shot at winning.
Toyota, already fully immersed in the WEC paddock of course, managed to continue building and maintaining their momentum. And then using this, the GR010 I'm driving on GT7, they were able to set the standard for pace. I mean, this car was definitely not perfect out of the box, let me get that clear, but it was still so far ahead of the others in terms of overall comfort, performance, reliability, and Toyota were able to secure a 1-2 finish, their 4th consecutive victory at Le Mans. 4 wins then became 5 wins, another 1-2, another totally dominant display in 2022. And that actually brings us fully up to date with the history of Le Mans 24 Hour. Of course, we started making this series during the 2022 Le Mans race. This car, this Toyota GR010, is the current star of Le Mans. It's the reigning champion. Toyota are still on their 5-win streak. That's not the end of the story, however, because, as you may or may not be aware, very, very special things are happening right now in the world of sports car racing.
Everyone who's followed the World Endurance Championship will know that these recent years have been the calm before the mother of all storms. 2023 marks the 100th anniversary of the first ever Le Mans 24-hour race, and aside from the associated sentimentality this brings, the hypercar and LMDH entry list alone makes this the most anticipated edition in its storied history. Porsche, the best of them all, are back with an LMDH. Ferrari return with a works entry in the top class at Le Mans for the first time since the early 70s, the car's exuberant style befitting of the badge. The Vanwall name returns as a naturally aspirated V8 hypercar, Cadillac are having a go with an LMDH, even Peugeot are returning to the fold using ground effect as the foundation for their hypercar design. All of these teams will face the existing programs from Glickenhaus and current champions Toyota. No longer the perpetual bridesmaids, now relentless victors, on a run that may see them challenge Porsche's record of 7 consecutive wins. They're going to have to beat the very best to manage this though. It feels like the ultimate Le Mans Greatest Hits album, and with Lamborghini, Alpine, BMW and possibly Isotta Fraschini all bringing their own hypercars and LMDHs in 2024, well, you can see why everybody is so excited. Of course, as I keep saying, it's not all about the top class, and over the last few decades, the supporting classes have been more competitive and exciting than ever before. LMP2 and GTE have made WEC what it is today, but things will be changing. The hypercar class won't just be filled with factory teams. Customer cars have already been sold to the likes of Jota, and many more will be following suit. This means well over 20 cars are expected to be on the grid in the top class over the next few years, so to simplify things and keep it all under control, LMP2 is being axed at the end of the year. And of course, as I mentioned earlier, a GT3 Pro-Am class will be replacing GTE, meaning yet again, more manufacturers and cheaper running costs. All of this means only 2 classes of car, but each stacked with strength and depth. This may make things a little easier to follow as fans, but we'll all have to wait and see how it plays out in reality.
Personally speaking, I have never been more excited about sports car racing. Honestly, it's been 100 years since this race kicked off, and I genuinely feel like a lot of people are more excited about this particular Centenary race than any races that have come before. Le Mans, of course, has a massive history, as we've covered in the series. I mean, I think we've barely scratched the surface, to be honest. So the fact that we're all so excited now about this race is, I think, a really, really good sign for the future. It's also amazing that we get to experience so much of the history of the event through racing games. We've obviously got lots of classic cars on Assetto Corsa, current and semi-classic cars, I would say, on iRacing as well. I'm using the van wall in rFactor 2 right now. We have all the GTEs in rFactor 2. Project Cars 2 has so much Le Mans content as well, and then obviously Gran Turismo goes without saying. So much Le Mans content. And it's not just about the cars either. We've got a number of amazing versions of the Circuit de la Sarthe layout as well, across the likes of iRacing RF2. There's just so many ways to get your Le Mans fix, whether it's current or historical. Obviously all of us at Traxion are just massive racing game fans and massive motorsport fans in general. And I think the era we're in right now, with all this accessibility, we're very, very lucky. This is something truly, truly special.
There will be kids growing up today that love racing cars, who are about to witness their first ever Le Mans 24-hour race, whether that be on TV or in person. Based on what's happening right now, I feel like these kids will look back at this era, the Centenary and whatever may follow, as the glory days. Much like we all did with Ford versus Ferrari, Porsche 917s, Group C, GT1s, Audi R8s and LMP1s. Who knows, anything can happen of course, but one thing that never changes is the magic feeling this place evokes. Here's to the next 100 years at La Sarthe, and thanks for the epic memories, the unbelievable history of Le Mans. I can't wait to see what's next.